I am pulling out of the gas station here because I needed gas, obviously. Um, excuse me. Anyway, I recorded this footage. That's been a few days, but not that long ago. Just give you an idea of spring. It was still cool then. It's a lot warmer now. It's what, June 3rd or 4th today? 3rd. And it's turning out to be a very dry spring. I've been digging out in my garden. So I'm inside for a little bit of a break, and I'm going to go out again. In fact, somewhere up here you can see my video that I took before I did some of the digging that's been done. Kind of resting my shoulder this weekend. I think I mentioned in the garden video that my shoulder's I've aggravated an old shoulder injury, and so giving that a break. I may even cheat with some of my digging and not truly dig it. We'll see. I'm just kind of got to rest that shoulder. I'm no doctor or anything, but pain is usually your body's way of saying, hey, something wrong here. So since I don't want to go back to the injury that I had in the first place, I'm going to take a few days off. So we're racing down this highway at about 140 miles per hour, and I'm not exaggerating because I'm running this at double speed because this little stretch of scenery just isn't that interesting, but I felt the need to put it in here. I don't know why, but I did. This is Highway 12. We're heading west. And since I mostly can't give you good route numbers because most of this trip is going to be on gravel roads, you're just going to have to guess the rest of it from this road. But anyway, as you can see, it was a very nice day. I must have run the windshield washer there. I can't think why else that happened. Which is funny because I just came out of a gas station, but whatever. Funny because gas stations always provide windshield washing, and that's one of the things I needed to do because I don't think you can really make them out. But I was dealing with some birds this week that were pooping all over my car and all over the windshield. And I've been out several times with water and a brush to clean that stuff off before it starts eating my paint. Ew! I don't know about you, but I've got a spot where I do my pooping. But animals they don't think of it that way. And actually, if the birds were pooping in my garden, I'd be like, hey, free fertilizers. But they're not. So, anyway, this is a long trip, especially since I am speeding up the beginning and cutting some of it out. I mean, why I'm headed out here, on the 29th, Memorial Day, part of a Memorial Day program that we put on for the community of Rame. It's actually at a church about 15 miles north of Rame, and I've been working all week, so I haven't been able to do any of the prep work, so what I always volunteer to do is, hey, the Saturday before, I'll go out and clean the outhouses, which is a job nobody wants to do, and so that's why I've volunteered to do it, because, hey, it's not that hard of a job. What I do is I take a shop vac out and vacuum. And I'm smart, and take this as kind of a safety thing. There have been people die. And I don't mean that as an exaggeration. I mean that literally by stirring up mouse poop or bat poop. Because they stir up, I can't remember if it's pronounced hantavirus or hantavirus. And there's apparently bats, there's a toxoplasmosis. But anyway, all of which are things I do not care to inhale. So what I do, I put the really super long hose in my shop vac and leave the shop vac outdoors. So yeah, there's some risk, but not huge amounts of risk. And then, of course, the shop vac, I have the filter and the bag in it. And when all cleaning was done, the filter and the bag went into a garbage bag, and of course all that was done outside. And the shop vac was thoroughly hosed off before being brought back inside. Hosed off inside and out. So, it's not 100% elimination of risk, but it pretty much does the job. If I had to bring the outhouse or the vacuum into the outhouse with me, not so much. And the way they've done it for years, which is why I started volunteering to do it, is somebody would go in and sweep it out and, asking for trouble if there's any of that stuff in the droppings. Of course, there's a lot of road dust in the outhouse, a lot of spider webs, a lot of seeds. They're They're old-fashioned outhouses because the place does not have indoor plumbing. So when we get out there, I'll tell you a little bit more about the Memorial Day program. It's if you're not a religious person, there might be a few things you don't like about it, but overall, I think you'd be pretty comfortable with it. Got to pause here. Of course, when I'm driving in these, you may have noticed I don't have road sounds. Sometimes I run the radio. What I've gotten into doing more often lately is run my iPad through the tape deck on my car. Yes, there's still a tape deck. And listen to that. I used to listen to talk radio more when I drove, but around here it's basically right-wing talk radio, so And actually here in southwestern North Dakota, there isn't really a lot of talk radio you can pick up, just because we're so far from a lot of radio stations. So there's a classic rock station over in Baker I will sometimes listen to. But I was listening to the iPad. And anyway, it's copyrighted music, which is why I don't play it. I could run this in silence, but there's no way I could keep up the narration while I'm driving. Driving is one of those chances for my mind to just wander. So rather than talk to you, I'm going to let my mind wander. We are turning north here into the city of Rame. Rame is a city of about 150 people, and you're thinking, oh, he's saying city to be ironic and funny. No, in North Dakota, they're all called cities. From the smallest little podunk thingy to Bismarck or Fargo. They're all cities. North Dakota doesn't mess with towns and villages and all that business. Main Street in Rame was recently repaved. They took up the pavement because it was getting to be in pretty bad shape, and I'm pleased with what happened. One thing Rame is struggling with is businesses. That gray building there is a restaurant, and they're trying desperately to find somebody to run it. On the left, we just passed a grocery store, which has been out of business for a few years, and a bar, which of course is still in business, but it's in tough shape. Not much left in Rame, honestly. Don't know really what to say about it. Up here somewhere there is a spring that apparently was part of the problem with the street, so I think they've solved it. I don't know. And, so that's Rame, North Dakota. I'm going to turn here. That's the only main street, and what we're headed up now are the only paved streets in Rame. The rest of it is gravel. I mean, it's pretty well maintained gravel, and usually the turnoff, right, the first few feet of the turnoff is paved, but then it's gravel after that. And I think I've taken you down a couple streets in Rame in other videos, so won't do that today. But I was thinking I've never taken you north on this road, so you get to see something here in just a minute. This is the school, the old Rame High School. When they closed, it's been 11, 12 years now, they had about 70 students, K through 12, and it was time. The tall building was the high school. There is a smaller building beside it where they still have elementary students, but they closed the high school. It's just, in a town like that, a school that size, how do you attract teachers? How do you pay them enough to want to come there? And if you can attract them, they're thinking, oh, what's job security like here? And, most of the high school staff was older. They actually closed kind of as a result of the retirement of their science teacher and high school principal. And I'm trying to think, most of their high school staff have since retired. There is, I guess, one still teaching. She teaches special ed. I take that back too. Their VOAG teacher is teaching in a different school district. Still teaching. But yeah, it was an older staff. I can't remember what they did for music, but I know all this because they came over to where I teach. We got their high school students. We actually have some of their elementary students too, just because their parents work in my town and they just don't want to go to, they want them to go to school where they work, basically. So they bring them over. Ooh, pause. You didn't see it because I deleted it, but there was a footnote there. I did start to film this a few nights ago, and it was at night. and I can tell it was at night from my voice because I'm slow and doing a lot, and it's just not that easy to listen to. So I deleted all the audio, and I thought, hey, I'm resting up from working outdoors, so why don't I record some stuff while I'm sitting here? Because it's either I'm not feeling energetic enough to do any creating. Okay, yeah, this is creating, but it's not the same kind as shooting a pen video, working on my novel, working on my chemistry class or whatnot. So yeah, it just seemed like, yeah, let's delete the audio and try again. So I'll come back to those topics. In fact, I was actually talking a little bit ago before I got distracted by turning into rain about how it's kind of nice just to let my mind roam when I'm driving out here. And I'll tell you what the first footnote was. It was a link to information on, I don't remember. Okay, had to look because there were two different cities and I couldn't remember which one was first. Link to some information on Whittier, Alaska. Now, Whittier is a small town in Alaska of 220 people. It has almost everybody living under one roof. Seriously. Because it was an old, Air Force base, I think. And they're basically living in some of the old Air Force base buildings. One of them. There's another one about equal size that's abandoned. There's several businesses, and the school are actually in that building also. There's fishing goes on there and whatnot. But yeah, it's kind of an odd place. I've never heard of a town that lives in one building before. And I just kind of ran into it by accident. I was exploring something totally unrelated. It was a Russian photographer. I don't know why I was on his website one night. But he travels around the world and photographs odd places like Whittier, Alaska. Whittier, Alaska is actually accessed by a 2.5 mile tunnel. I'm doing this from memory. It's a one-way tunnel. Excuse me. It's also shared with railroad. So you might have a 2-3 hour wait before it's your turn to go through the tunnel. And I imagine it's very claustrophobic going through that tunnel. But that's the only way to get there by road. You can get there by sea because they have some sort of a harbor. I'm guessing they do some fishing or something there. But just a very different kind of place. And that's kind of part of what I do. I read about a lot of things, or I'll watch YouTube videos or other things. And it really educates me because it's hard for me to do lots of traveling. Honestly, this garden kind of ties me down. And, I probably spent more than I should on fountain pens over the years. But anyway, I like to see different places because I write. And I don't know what I would use Whittier, Alaska for at the moment. But that's kind of a unique place. It gets me thinking about colonies on other planets or something, because I write science fiction. And perhaps there's a way I can use that concept. And, another footnote just popped up, and I apparently forgot to erase it. So let me tell you about that footnote. That footnote was about Kowloon City, which I have actually incorporated into my writing. Now, Kowloon City was, I should say, the most densely populated place on Earth. It was located near Hong Kong. It was actually started by refugees. And as I remember, there's a temple inside of it. But what it was built without building codes, without expert architects, just kind of the people living there assembling a city. They were refugees, like I said. And built quite a thing. Now, the link takes you to a Daily Mail article, and I will concede that Daily Mail is not the most reputable source for journalism. What I enjoyed about this particular article was just the amount of pictures. And I would suggest, if you're into this, explore and read more about Kowloon City, because it's a fascinating place. Not as crime-ridden as its reputation would imply. But yeah, you were living indoors, cramped, crowded apartments, horrific living conditions. And like I said, oddly, there's a temple deep down inside. It's just like, what? What? Underneath grading and everything. But worth exploring because there's nothing like it. I guess in the 80s, Hong Kong forced the people of Kowloon City out. Some of them actually outright refused and had to be forced out. Hong Kong tried to buy them out and provide them new housing, but they had formed a community there. I mean, they were happy there. And so, I guess that shows that people can adapt to anything. I mean, I wouldn't want to live in Kowloon City, but how interesting to read about. So it got me thinking, would there be colonies like that in the future? Could you build a colony on, say, an airless world, or in a world with a poisonous atmosphere, without the benefit of government intervention? You need to have some people know what they're doing, but when you look at Kowloon City, clearly there were people there that knew what they were doing. So I do have a place like that in my novels. It is, I won't tell you its name. I'm kind of toying around. I want to have sort of an exotic name for it. And, but I don't want to call it Kowloon City, of course. So, yeah, I'm playing around with names from different ethnicities and so on, and just haven't really settled on a name for it. So, none of the action in this novel I'm working on right now takes place there. They refer to it because they're selling some scrap oxygen scrubbers to the place, but they don't actually go there until novel number 2, that will someday be the sequel to the one I'm working on. But just kind of interesting. And, I never would have thought of it except for running into Kowloon City somewhere in my reading. I want to say Robert Ludlum had a novel. Oh, and I couldn't tell you which one, but he has an assassin he uses who I think in one of the novels met somebody at Kowloon City. Which is interesting because a Western face would have really stood out in a place like Kowloon City, but whatever. Anyway, it was interesting. Actually, now that I think about it, I believe it was one of his Jason Bourne novels. Wouldn't swear to it, but I think so. Not the first one, but maybe the second or third one. Hard to say. Without looking, and I don't want to get up and look, I'm sitting here resting from digging. And I'm going to go out and dig again soon, probably before I finish this video, because that's a long time to talk. Hour and 40 minutes. Excuse me, also a long time to listen. So hopefully you're doing something else while you listen to this and look at the scenery. But that's part of what happens while I garden and while I drive, is my mind just starts randomly connecting. I'll tell you, while I was out there digging today, a lot of what my mind was randomly connecting was some chemistry stuff. I was thinking a lot about the order of presentation and where I need to put stuff. I actually rearranged my chemistry class a few years ago in response to state testing. We do our state science test in the fall, in October, during their junior year. God knows why. But anyway, they're testing on a bunch of stuff that I felt like, I need to review that before they take their state testing. Well, one of the things I've run into is not a lot of kids are taking chemistry. I blame a couple of things. One of them is we have too many choices. But another one is they have to get 3 science credits to graduate. Way too many of them take the easiest science course they can, which is not chemistry. And then, so I'm not teaching most of the kids taking the test, so most of the kids I'm teaching are going to do fine on the test anyway. So I've been thinking, why bother? Teach it the way it should be taught. Don't worry about state test, because it's not going to affect it anyway. So I was kind of mulling over the order of topics and so on. And yeah, I just got a little bit editorial there, but oh well. So that's one of the things I was mulling over. And that's what I do when I let my mind drift. I didn't walk out there thinking, oh, I better plan for that chemistry class. I just went out there and did. And your mind just free associates. And it's good if there's stuff in it for your brain to free associate. Now, part of why I liked, well, speaking of free associating, part of why I liked this footage, and I want the whole thing together, is that amazing sky. There were thunderstorms, and at various points you're going to see streaks of the rain falling elsewhere, and sometimes right where I'm driving. And it's just kind of cool. One of the things I love about North Dakota is the wide open space where you can really see the sky. And you can see that, oh, they're having a thunderstorm up in Amadon, even though Amadon is 30 miles away. And I do not live in the flat part of North Dakota. This dash cam really does flatten the landscape, but it is not flat like eastern North Dakota. Eastern North Dakota, in the Red River Valley especially, is, oh my god, is so boring. It's so flat. One of these days I need to take you over there. I almost took you over there. I had to drive students there for State Science Olympiad because the school didn't want to provide a bus. Well, okay, slight lie. They didn't want to provide a bus driver, so guess who the bus driver was? But then I thought, yeah, I don't really want to do that on school time, so I didn't. I mean, it wouldn't have cost the school anything or hurt the school at all, and who knows, maybe if I would have been in an accident, maybe it could have saved my liability or something, but wasn't in an accident, and I just didn't feel comfortable doing that, so I didn't. But the thing is, it is so flat over there. Yes, there can be pretty things, like I really enjoy a field of sunflowers that are in bloom. A field of flax in bloom looks a lot like a lake reflecting the sun. What else? I can't think of anything else, but it can be pretty, but it's not this landscape. It's sort of boring. There are pretty things over there. I like the Cheyenne River Valley. In fact, you go through towns like Catherine and Valley City. That's really nice. Jamestown is actually a very attractive town in a valley. Valley City is obviously in a valley too. It might have actually been good to have the dash cam with me when we went east, because we did go through part of Valley City and the Valley City State University campus, because we stopped there for a little while. That is a very attractive campus. In fact, of the small colleges in North Dakota, Valley City is probably the one I would recommend the highest, especially if you want to be a teacher. I actually think Minot is doing a good job too. But Valley City, maybe it's because I know more about their programs, because I've taught with people who went to Valley City, and I know some of the professors there, and I've done, there's a group called NCATE, and what they do is they evaluate teacher preparation programs, and I've been on the NCATE team that evaluated Valley City, and I just was so impressed by a lot of the things I saw there. So, yeah, if you're looking for a good teacher college or a decent small state school, Valley City would be one to consider. I won't tell you the ones I would say to avoid, because I don't want that on permanent record, because I'm a teacher. So I won't go into that. But yes, Valley City is one I would put up there as a good one. But, for the most part, the east end of the state's flat. Now, I do want to explore the northeast. I was extremely tempted. Walhalla, North Dakota, is looking for a science teacher, and they're right at the one end of the Pembina River Gorge, and they pay better than where I teach now. I was extremely tempted by that, but I didn't ultimately go for it. For reasons. I'm considering leaving here. I have a pen pal actually in a town in Massachusetts, and I was just a little curious about the school there in the town she lives in. I won't name the town because I don't know if she wants that kind of attention. But anyway, I looked at it. So they're actually looking for a physics teacher. And guess who has a degree in physics? And wow, was that tempting. But, I have to be realistic. I think I need to put in a few more years here. I will get I will get my roof fixed on the house, which is something that needs to be done sooner rather than later. I'll get the trim done. I'll get this house looking like a decent house. It'll be a lot easier to sell. And my finances will be in better order, because I'll tell you, making a huge down payment on a house really did a number on my finances. But I am thinking about, possibly getting my financial house in order and then looking at a different job in North Dakota to finish out my career, a little bit higher paying job. I've actually considered, I'm not thrilled with the idea of administration, but more and more I'm starting to see that administration makes a big difference, and they make a lot of money. So I'm considering finishing out my career in North Dakota in administration. Just the last few years, I don't want to be an administrator for too long, because it's a very high stress job. I'm going to swear here, but put up with it. Administrators have to put up with a lot of bullshit. I teach. Yeah, occasionally a parent gets mad at me. Why didn't my kid get an A or whatever? But they don't care. If I was a coach, they would care more, because it's sports, and that's actually important to them. But you just don't hear as much. You don't really hear about your classroom stuff unless it interferes with sports. But what I see with administrators is they have to deal with a lot of parents who are angry about things they shouldn't be angry about. Like parents who are angry when their kid gets in trouble for not coming to school. Really hard one. Sometimes administrators have to make that tough call of turning in a parent for educational neglect. You want to piss off a parent, do that. Administrators also have to deal with bullshit, pardon my French again, from teachers. I have learned that teachers are worse than students. It amazes me the amount of drama some of my colleagues will stir up over nothing, just because they feel like being outraged today. And of course, as far as students, your administrators sometimes deal with the good students, but a lot of their time is spent dealing with discipline and the rotten students. I get the reward every day of, basically the kids behave. Once in a while somebody acts up, but, I don't deal with a whole lot of discipline. Oh, pause here. They're scraping the surface off the road. I didn't expect that as I came up over the hill. I knew it was coming. I knew they were going to work on this road. I just didn't know they'd started yet. So this was a real surprise. And so they put gravel over top of crap, because the soil out here is terrible. That's part of why they're reworking the road too, is because this awful soil underneath it is finally affecting the surface. So I did not expect this, and I didn't realize how bad it was, and it just got worse. And for our Memorial Day program, it was even worse than this. So I'm pretty sure now that they've finally closed, at least I hope they finally closed the road, because ugh. Get any rain on this at all, you're in trouble. This will turn into soup. Slippery, greasy soup. And, I personally think they should have put a road closed sign up. But then on the other hand, I think I did get through it. But then I also know how to drive on this. And what if you don't? But in Soap County, I think they just basically assume everybody knows how to drive on it. So, I paused there because I was thinking, what's the best way to get a Toyota Camry through this part? Because, yeah, the camera flattens everything, but it was very rutted. And I really didn't want to scrape the bottom of my car off on the road. But anyway, yeah, so administration, they have to deal with a lot. But at the same time, they do have a lot of ability to create a good school climate or a really awful school climate, because I've worked for both types of administrators. Very good ones and very bad ones. So I've seen how a good administrator, after a few years, because it never happens instantly like it does in the movies, after a few years, an administrator can turn a school around for the better or for the worse. And no, I'm not going to tell you what schools I'm talking about. But anyway, I got off the road construction there. So that's a possibility. I've also thought about guidance counselor for my last few years. I want to stay in the classroom, and when I leave the classroom, I want it to be one of those, no, don't leave, we want you to stay. Instead of, oh, thank God he's gone, and now he's somebody else's problem. So, anyway, so I'm thinking, but then after I retire from North Dakota, it might be fun to go back to the classroom, teach, now that I've seen it from an administrator, I'm collecting an administrator's retirement, go back to the classroom in another state, teach physics, maybe even only teach part-time. Maybe a school would be looking for that. Alright, so since I'm really close to where the Memorial Day program will be held, you're going to see a cemetery up here on the left pretty soon. That's what the trees are off in the distance. They're closer than they appear. But anyway, that's a cemetery. It was started back in the teens. 2 little girls drowned just down the road here, so a family that owned this land donated the land so that they could be buried here. It's just up the road from a church. The church was built in 1914. And there used to be a one-room schoolhouse down the road. That closed. Moved to a 2-room schoolhouse, which closed in the 60s. There's the cemetery. All this is pertinent, and I'll tell you why. In 1919, a gentleman from this area, and I don't think I'm destroying his privacy because he died in 1919, or was it 1918? 1918, I apologize. 1918. A man named Gene Pearl died. He was shot in October in the First World War. I believe he was in France. And anyway, that spring, that's why 1919 is in my memory. And those are the 2 outhouses I'm going to vacuum out. Excuse me. But spring of 1919 in his honor, because he was from a family real close to the church. The farm is no longer in existence, but he was shot and buried in France for 3 years, but then his body was brought back in the early 20s. But anyway, that spring, this church held the community, that's like I said, it's a community Memorial Day service, not really a church service. The community held a Memorial Day service in his memory. The kids at that local one-room school went out into the pastures and fields and picked wild flowers and bundled them up with ribbons and laid flowers on all the graves at the cemetery. Now, of course, there were a lot fewer graves then, but anyway, that's what they did. And veterans' graves were marked with flags. Veterans' graves are also marked with an iron cross, or metal cross, I should say. I don't think it's iron, painted white. And so they all got flags, so that way everybody was remembered. And since then, the tradition has continued every Memorial Day. After the school closed, it became an exclusively run by the church, but like I said, it's a community function. In fact, Rame, North Dakota, does not have a Memorial Day service or program. It's all done out here at this church. These people were actually out at the cemetery, so I had to stop and talk to them. But, excuse me, anyway, So the church picked it up. So as part of the Memorial Day program, which is held on Memorial Day, it was held the traditional date, the 30th, but we've kind of weakened and now we've gone with that Monday. They walk out to the cemetery after the service, the congregation, and do the same thing. They decorate all the graves with flowers and then flags for the veterans. And then we walk back to the church and have a potluck. And yeah, so that's the program. Usually there's some kind of a speaker. One year we had a Iraq War veteran speak. We actually had him. I had several Iraq War veterans lately. Had Vietnam War veterans speak one year. We had a daughter of a World War II veteran speak. He didn't speak because he died a few years ago, but we had her speak because her father was, if you've ever heard of the Ghost Soldiers, he was a POW in Japan, and most of the POWs in his group were killed and during their internment there in Japan. And he was one of the few survivors, and so she talked about him. That's probably one of the best we've had. The Vietnam War veteran actually talked about how you can recognize veterans and the welcome he got returning from Vietnam and how naive he had been to what was going on at home. The amount of hate that those veterans faced because of a war that they didn't necessarily want any part of. You know, it was the rich and the powerful that set off that war, just like any war. But it was the men and women in uniform who were not rich and powerful for the most part who suffered the brunt of the hate. That was another pretty good one. Alright, so I'm going to turn north here. I could go back south, but honestly, the road sort of deterred me, and I was curious to see, because the north part they've already worked. I think they still need to put a little more gravel on it, but it's basically done. So I took the scenic route home. That's always tempting. Put another link here. This one is to a YouTube channel. This guy does a lot of what I do. He drives around and he edits better than I do. I pretty much just show you the whole thing. He just takes selected portions, and he actually has a camcorder that mounted on a bracket on his dashboard, and that's what he uses for his filming. I'm not sure if he adds the narration later, or if it's as he's driving, or if it's a mixture of both. But anyway, he Bullfrog 54, I think, or 52, something like that. But he lives in Baltimore, Maryland, and drives a lot to Pennsylvania, which is cool because I'm from Pennsylvania originally. So I've actually seen one of the towns I've lived in. He has been through the town where my grandparents used to live. He's not been over to the other two towns I lived in, or much of the western part of Pennsylvania where I went to college. But it's interesting. It's just sometimes I look at his stuff and I think, why did I leave? It's so pretty. And then other times I look at his stuff and think, it's so closed in. There's so many trees and so many people. And, you know, I don't know, horse apiece, I guess. That's part of why I want to have an adventure after I retire here in North Dakota. I've lived longer in North Dakota now than I've lived anywhere else. And I'm starting to get that itch of what else is out there. I want to try somewhere else. I've actually lived longer in this particular town in North Dakota than I've lived anywhere else. So, yeah, I want to get out and just see something new. So, I guess if you have that itch to roam, don't get into gardening and don't buy a house. So, anyway, on that note, I just realized I've been talking for almost 40 minutes. One or two pauses to refill my water, and the last refill was not water. So I'm starting to think I need to get back out into the garden again and plant some more stuff. But I'll finish up this glass of not water that's in my hand right now. You can see it started to rain. I guess a few places there was a real downpour. I didn't experience that. But that's kind of neat. You're driving through the rain and yet it's bright and sunny, or whatever. And you see that kind of drifting below that cloud there. That's rain off in the distance. And I was reading somewhere, I wish I'd written down the reference or bookmarked it, but apparently there's a lot of rain that happens that never actually reaches the ground because it evaporates before it gets to the ground. So I just found that interesting. And you can see here with the road construction, what they do is they take up a lot of topsoil in the ditches. Let me tell you about the ditches a bit. In North Dakota, if you ever visit here, you'll see that there are quite deep ditches alongside the roads. I'm told you'll see that in the southeast United States also, but it's for totally different reasons. I guess in the southeast United States it's because of water. In North Dakota, I guess you could say it's because of water, but it's in a totally different state of matter. In North Dakota, it's because of snow. But they put deep ditches on roads, especially north-south roads, because that allows the snow to blow off the road. It will collect in the ditches on either side and not on the road, and then that reduces the amount of plowing they have to do. Now, this past winter, we had a lot more snow than normal, and the ditches got full in some places. When that happens, then the snow starts to drift across the road. And then the county has to go out there and clear it out constantly. Doesn't matter if it snowed the night before or not. They just have to go out and plow it out. I think this winter you saw some of that in my videos when I would show you my backyard and the drifts back there. They got quite deep. Now imagine that on a road. Now what the county will do is they'll go out in the field sometimes on the side where the prevailing winds come from, and they will plow 3 rows, and they'll pile up the snow in 3 parallel rows. And the idea there is the snow, as it blows across this field, will swirl in those 3 rows and drift there rather than across the road. And it's somewhat effective. But yeah, that's why the ditches are so deep in North Dakota, is they're just trying to reduce the amount of time they have to spend plowing. Which makes sense to me. So I was looking out at the garden as I was digging. I may or may not have taken a short break there to do some more digging. I have a few seed potatoes. I don't have very many because potatoes take up a lot of space, and honestly, they're not that expensive in the grocery store, and the flavor's not that different. So I'm seriously wondering if I want to waste any space on potatoes, or if I'd rather put the space to other vegetables. We'll see. If there's space left over, maybe I'll throw some potatoes in. But yeah, I'm thinking about that because a bag of potatoes is dirt cheap. And again, the flavor, not that different. About the only advantage possibly would be if I were to plant some potatoes that I can't grow or I can't get at the grocery store. But, I bought these here in my small town, and I'm pretty sure, well, I know that they are what I can get at the grocery store. So, yeah, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to put any potatoes in. Well, I'm strongly leaning towards no. I'd rather put in, more beans or peas. This year I'm actually putting in okra, which is something I've never grown before. And I put in an extra large number of pepper plants this year, more than I normally plant, because I've really enjoyed eating those out of the garden. Carrots, last year no carrots came up, which was really sad. So I'm hoping this year I'll have lots of carrots. Beets, they're always awesome. I love fresh beets out of the garden. Back when I taught biology, I'd usually plant extra beets because then I used them in a couple of diffusion labs later on in the year when they were starting to get sort of gross down where I store them in my crawl space because it's not heated. But peas, you would think I'd do well with peas, but I really don't. I don't know why, but I honestly don't. Um, Maybe it just gets hot too quickly here. I remember as a kid, in Pennsylvania, I loved peas. I'd eat them like candy right out of the pod. But I just, I'd get a few. That's it. Very disappointing. I when I lived further north in the state, I had a lot better luck with peas. So I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. So beans definitely. Last year I tried growing scarlet runner beans. They were awful. I mean, I talked to some people who grew them. They're like, yeah, they're just like weeds. You get these huge vines and more beans than you know what to do with. Not for me. They grew a little bit of a vine, then they died. And I don't know if it was because it was a dry summer or the soil here is crap or what it is, but yeah, that was depressing. I'm hoping as this garden continues and I mix more organic material into it to get the soil better and better. But really, you can see why around here it's ranch country. This is not, I mean, there are fields, but it's not big time farm country. It's not flat enough, and the soil just isn't very good. I mean, I'm on the edge of the Badlands. You have probably seen a little bit of Badlands on this route. In fact, I know you have. We're on the edge of it. In fact, true story, when I get this garden done, and I'm going to a meeting in Bismarck this week, but when I get this garden done, there is a trip to Medora in the future. There is also a trip to Watford City in the future. 2 separate trips because I want to make them unique. The trip to Medora may involve a trip to Dickinson. I haven't decided yet. There, off in the distance, you can see it's raining over there. Look at the streaks. It's rain. All right, my knot water is done. So I'm going to go out and do some more planting. I don't think any potatoes are going in this year. But that's okay. I put in some other fun stuff. I love vegetables from the garden. Alright, so it is now several hours later. I have been out doing a lot more digging. I trimmed all the grass around the house, pulled a bunch of weeds. Anyway, I basically have 2 easy beds left to dig up and 1 semi-difficult bed to dig up. So lots of progress has been made. I used the cultivator instead of the fork to dig, so that should be a lot easier on my shoulder. Didn't go down as deep, but they're basically flower beds, so who cares? Alright, so the fresh vegetables are definitely a thing I enjoy, so I'm looking forward to them. I'm not so much a flower guy, but I do have a few flowers around. In fact, I bought some petunias that are supposed to spread and make good ground cover. I am thinking about that bed that I wanted to dig up this year that I'm not going to be able to because of my shoulder. And I'm wondering about just covering it with newspaper and, something to hold the newspaper down. And then planting a couple of those spreading petunias there just to cover it up while the grass dies underneath the newspaper. And then maybe by fall I'll be ready to dig it up. I have to think about it, but that's an option because I'm running out of places to put those petunias. I didn't read closely how much they spread. So, yeah. See the rain? That's so cool. By the way, on your left there, that is an old schoolhouse and a teacherage. I think this is the actual schoolhouse. The teacherage was the other building. It's, boy, I don't remember the name of that school. I want to say Deep Creek, but that doesn't seem right because I know where Deep Creek is and it's not right there. There's actually 2 Deep Creek schools and we'll go by them both. I'll have to ask. Somebody will know. But anyway, kind of fun. Would I want to teach in one of those schools? Oh, hell no. I wouldn't want to teach. First of all, it's elementary. Second of all, you teach in like 9 grades of children all at once. I can see where the teacher would get overwhelmed. Plus, there's the isolation thing. Part of me likes the idea of living out in the country a lot. Part of me knows it's good for me to be in town and interact with people. Because I do tend to be somewhat introverted, and I think if I lived out in the country, I might not interact with people at all. So, probably better than I'm in town, but I do love it out here. And, who knows where I'll end up down the road. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I've been considering a few different options. Yes, this is turning into a long video about nothing, but I think I said that at the beginning, and I felt this need to share this full drive. It's just kind of a really perfect day, other than perhaps a bit too dry. If the sun were fully out, I think it would have washed the landscape out and it just wouldn't have been as impressive. If I go out later on during that golden hour when the sun is low in the sky, yes, everything looks better, but it doesn't last real long. And of course, with driving, you're constantly changing direction, so if you're pointed into the sun, this type of video just does not work. I have a video I drove back from a meeting in Bismarck. Well, it was a class, I guess. Anyway, a class in Bismarck. So I drove back in the evening. The south part, I went, through Fort Totten and all that. Or not Fort Totten, good grief. Standing Rock and all that. And then turned west. And all the going west footage is useless. Probably about a quarter of the going south footage is useless. It's just too bright. Too much sun right in the lens. And so then, because it's auto exposure, it blacks everything out. So what I did with that footage is I had to go back the next weekend to Bismarck, so I took that footage going north. So the going west part worked out really well. The going north part is mostly pretty good. There's 1 or 2 spots where you actually end up heading west for a brief little while. Those are ruined, but overall it worked out much better. So that's what you'll be getting. But the thing is, the coming south trip, I drove through a bunch of little towns just to kind of show their streets. So I think I'm going to take those parts, put them in the going north video, and scrap the rest of the going south video. Unless there's something in it, but I don't think there's anything too special. So that trip I will take you by where the DAPL pipeline protests occurred. And, at least show it to you in a different time of year. At the time the protests occurred, it was brown and didn't... And I know some people were looking at it saying, what are you protesting over that for? Why? I just want to get out of there. Well, when it's green, it looks a bit different. And I don't know if a lot of the media coverage was that favorable to the protesters. Honestly, I think... Well, I'll get into it in that video. This is a light, happy video. So I'll get into it in that video. But I believe I couldn't stop either time because a police officer was behind me both times. I don't know if they just follow unfamiliar cars or what, but I did try to at least show you where the protest happened. And we crossed a bridge where that was closed for a long time because of the protests. There's actually still a camp there related to the protests. So there's a few things around. But it's also very beautiful scenery. It's along the river most of the way. If you saw my inspiration video, I stopped in Huff, North Dakota. Gave you a look around. I looked over at the the river from Huff. So just beautiful area. And a different kind of beauty than this. I mean, it's along the river, but it's very rugged. There is actually a little bit of badlands. If you visit North Dakota, actually, eastern North Dakota is just flat. No other word for it. Now, as you go west, the middle of the state is pothole country, which means you'll see a lot of little lakes and pools and such full of ducks and so on. It's not rugged, but it's rolling. It's very attractive. I lived there for a while. And it's a lot of small towns, so that's kind of fun too, especially if you get off the interstate. I mean, seriously, get off the interstate if you're going to explore the state. And then as you go west, it gets a lot more rugged. Basically, you leave Bismarck and Mandan, it starts to, maybe there's something. You get west to New Salem, and it's really rugged. New Salem actually has a nice big butte with a big cow on it. Salem Sue, no, not joking. So I'll have to show you her sometime. I've driven past her, but I don't think I've done any driving on the interstate videos. Because, of course, I was driving back in the evening and driving into the sun. One thing that's come up just recently, in fact, I'm going to a meeting about it on Tuesday. I didn't tip the camera. That's me going around a curve. I take a lot of pictures. A lot of what I do is actually sports photography and stuff at the school. But I enjoy going out with the camera. In fact, I was kicking myself a few times that I hadn't brought the camera with me on this trip. But anyway, so I've over the years I've taken a number of landscape pictures. It's not something I'm particularly good at. I know my way around a camera, but just composing a landscape isn't the best for me. Especially capturing a landscape that's flatter like this. But I've taken a few, and anyway, I'm going to be meeting with a bank. They have branches in a number of towns in southwestern North Dakota. Possibly they will use some of my pictures in advertising. Now, I'm not going to get rich doing this. I'm probably not even going to rise to the cost of a fountain pen unless it's a real cheap one. But it'll be kind of fun just to see my pictures in advertising, and who knows, maybe somebody will see my pictures and it'll lead to something better. But anyway, for now, I'm just kind of looking forward to getting a little attention for my landscape pictures rather than just my sports pictures. And no, the bank is not getting my sports pictures, and here's why. If you know anything about the law behind photography, I could sell a picture of any kid playing basketball or football or whatever to the newspaper, no problem. Why? Because it's news. And as long as it's not taken in an area where they have a reasonable expectation of privacy, it's public. So a basketball game is totally public. I cannot use that picture in advertising if you can recognize the kid. Now, if it's really far away and it's just a bunch of random kids and you can't tell who they are, you can probably get away with that. Not always. But you can't get away with that unless you get their permission, which of course I do not. I don't do that. I just take pictures, and some of them I don't even sell them to the paper. The paper used to pay me, but new editors, that ended. Anyway, and that's a long story. I don't want to get... Well, okay, I'll get into it a little bit. Basically, I started out doing it for free, and then they got... mostly because the paper wasn't covering the school at all. And then a new editor took over, and he felt that it shouldn't be for free, and so he paid me very well, actually. When he moved on and new editors took over, they weren't so good about paying me, and then they'd forget one month, and eventually the checks just dried up, and I asked about it, and they said, it's kind of hard to do that, and We don't pay anybody else, which is true. The paper in a small town gets a lot of submitted stuff. And so I just thought, well, okay, what was the reason I do this? It was for the kids. And then I asked myself, would I probably be doing it anyway, even if nothing went to the paper? I was like, yeah. So anyway, I've continued to do it. What I actually do with the pictures, besides the paper, I always tag them with the kid's name, and so then I can make a gallery, like class of 2017 is what just graduated, and then I put their names in there, and every time Wallace Gunsnerger has a picture, the gallery just automatically sucks it in, and then that makes something I can give to them or to their parents, and when they graduate or before. A lot of them have asked for them before. So that's kind of cool. Some kids, of course, have more pictures than others because they're in more things, and that's just the way it is. And yes, there are times it gets to feel like an obligation. So I cut myself some slack since I'm not getting paid for it. I try to get to all the sports. Golf is just very difficult for me to get to because of when they hold golf. So I don't usually get golf, but see some rain off in the distance again. But, if it's a football game and the weather's rotten, I'll get a couple pictures for the paper at the beginning when the light's good, and then I'll go home. Because, they're my students, but they're not my kids. I'm not going to sit in rotten weather for them. If I have somewhere else to be, I'll go somewhere else. I don't have to take pictures of every game. Back when I had a junior high class, I used to take pictures at junior high games. Now, I basically tried to get to one of each junior high game, sport, one game of each, just because I'm also yearbook advisor and I do need those pictures. I try to have the kids do them, but it's good to have the backup, let's just say. Now if I taught junior high kids, I might care more and go to more of their games. I used to when I had junior high students, but don't anymore, so I don't care. And I don't care about trying to get photographs of kids from other towns. There's certain towns that they'll want pictures for their own papers, and I'll snap a couple, but I don't care because they're not my students. And I just realized we have passed Deep Creek, one of the Deep Creek schools, and I never even paid attention, so it was back there somewhere. Sorry about that. Not that it really matters. But anyway, I kind of have gotten so I enjoy doing sports photography. Now, I don't see it as a career, and honestly, the real sports photographers that make up their living doing it, that whole lifestyle does not appeal to me, so I'm pretty much at the level I would want to be at. So, but it's fun, and occasionally as something happens, like I was able to put 6 shots together into one of a kid freshman, who actually attempted a slam dunk. He missed, but made a cool series of shots, so it's just 6 shots of him, and I layered it so that it's like a stop motion photo, if that makes sense. We're working with the limits of my camera, of course. This is not a sports photography camera. It's a Canon 5D Mark II, and so what's it do? 3.9 shots a second, so not a sports camera. I just do the best I can. And the camera I bought, when the model was discontinued, I was able to get it much, 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 much cheaper than otherwise it would have been. And I have some lenses I use. For football, I use a 200 millimeter lens. It's a prime lens. Prime lens means you can't zoom them. The advantage is usually they have a much wider aperture, and you actually get pretty good quality photographs with them. A lot of the prime lenses are very good. Basketball, I like the 85 millimeter lens. On that camera, it's pretty much as your eye sees it. Let's see what else. 50 millimeter is a good one for if you're walking around and doing like groups. Volleyball, volleyball's a tough sport to figure out, and I don't get to practice that one as much because I also line judge, which I do get paid to do. So I only get to photograph a few of the games, but when I'll do the 85 millimeter lens sometimes. Sometimes there's a 135 millimeter lens. And last year I experimented a couple times when the games dragged on way too long, because volleyball can do that. This is the other Deep Creek School up here on the right. So I experimented with standing up in the top of the bleachers and looking down and trying to get girls like spiking over the net or whatever. So, yeah. Wrestling's a tough one. I've done everything from a 85 millimeter lens up to a 200 millimeter lens. I kind of depends on where I'm sitting, and usually the 200 is not so good. But sometimes the 85 is too far away. It depends on where they're at in the wrestling mat. I mean, sometimes they're really close to you and you want the 85. Sometimes they're way on the other side and you want the 135, and that's a time when a zoom lens would be nice. But like I said, you get better optics at a lower price with your prime lenses. Let's see, what other sports do I do? Football, volleyball, cross country. That one, I like the 200 millimeter the best, but I will also use the 85. It just kind of depends on where I'm able to get pictures. One of the troubles I run into sometimes is too many people crowd around you. So if they see you if you're using the 200, they don't see you, and they don't realize they're just standing in front of you. 85, it makes it easier. You have to be closer so then they at least realize they're in front of you. Some people honestly don't care. But anyway, actually, cross country is probably my favorite to photograph, though, because I've learned how to find good spots. And you're outdoors, you walk around the golf course. It's usually on a golf course. It's just kind of fun to be out and wandering around rather than locked into a gym or something. Oh, let's see. Spring, track. Mostly with track I use the 200. But with some events I switch over to the 85. It totally depends on the event. The 200 actually does take better photographs, but the 85 is good for things like hurdles, long jump, triple jump, of course, high jump, pretty much your jumping events. Javelin, I like the 200 because then I can be a little further away from them. Just so you're not a distraction. A lot of the throwing events, the 200's nice. The 200 is nice for a lot of running events, depending on where you station yourself, because you don't want to be in anybody's way. But then the 85 is nice for just walking around and getting those kind of pictures too. So, horse apiece. And that's the drawback to using prime lenses, is you're always switching lenses. I get bored doing that. But it's kind of fun just to have, back when I used to photograph the junior high events, that was always kind of neat. Well, it's still neat because those junior high kids are all in high school now, and I've got photographs of them. And, they grow up a lot between 7th grade up to being seniors. So that's fun. And that's another reason why I do try and get to at least one junior game of each sport every year. And of course, I also try to get pictures at the concerts and plays and stuff. We don't have a stage here. All that is held in the gym. which does not have a stage. Graduation, Science Olympiad, although that one's kind of tough because sometimes you can't photograph the events. Let's see. Those kind of things. Anyway, I'm drawing a blank here. But the moral of the story is it's fun to have that record of different activities, and then of course I take pictures of my own class. Now those I have to keep somewhat private because classroom is a gray area. That's not exactly open to the public, but it's not exactly private either. So my compromise is that the pictures are used for yearbook or for these individual galleries. And it's kind of fun. I'll put them up on my door also. So it's kind of like advertising of, hey, look what fun we have in my class. So do that too. I will say, since this isn't Texas, I think I can get away with this without getting in trouble. I do think sports are too big in schools. I'm not 100% in the camp of take them completely out, but I'm close to that. I do see some good of having them involved with the schools. It helps build a community as a school. The trouble with it, what I see is it becomes the focus of the school, it becomes the focus of the kids. I mean, I am so tired of, you'd think it would just be a stereotype, but the kid who's a hero because he's good at putting a ball through a net. I mean, really, in the great scheme of things, what's that matter? And everybody will pay lip service to the, well, academics is the most important thing, but realistically, you go to a school board meeting, and this is not a criticism of my school, this is a criticism of just about every school. You go to school board meetings, they're not talking about, oh, that new chemistry curriculum doesn't have them doing enough labs. It doesn't emphasize acid and base enough or whatever. No, it's all sports. And that is true at my school board too. Now there are reasons for this, so don't take this exactly as a slam at my school because it is not. If I'm going to attack my school, I'm not going to put it in video where my boss can hear it. So don't take this that way. But the school a couple years ago came into some extra money, kind of a one-time thing from the state. And one of the options on the table was to renovate the science labs. Another option was new track. Guess what we went with? Wasn't a new science lab. So we do have a lovely track now. Now, as I said, there are several reasons why they did that. I ended up, as I started hearing them talk about how to cut corners on the science room, I was like, maybe it'd be better not to do the science room, because to actually do it properly and have it be better than what we have would have required a lot more than they were willing to invest. So I actually did speak up against renovating the science room, and I hated to do it. What I did get were some concessions on certain necessary safety issues that needed to be taken care of. And I don't want to get into all that, but keep in mind my room was built in the 60s, and yes, it's all original in there. So we did put some money into that room that was absolutely necessary, because it was dangerous. But we didn't renovate it. But I guess if I have old lab tables but new fixtures on them, but what's the difference really other than aesthetics? I don't have the fume hood I'd like to have, and honestly in that room I don't know where I'd put it. I don't have a lot of the equipment I'd like to have, but I'm slowly working on it. Every year I get a little bit more, and I'll get there. But back on the sports thing, I think it's really bad for the culture because who do parents get upset with all the time? It's not the teacher. We're, I mean, they'll be upset with me if their kid is failing the class or something, especially if he can't play his sports. But basketball or football, they're on the coaches all the time. Why aren't you playing my kid more? Why do you play that kid? Why did you do that play? Nobody comes in and says, why did you teach that lesson on mixtures that way? I mean, I suppose I could get the attention. I could say something really offensive in class or whatever. But sometimes it's tempting. But basically, the main priority is the sports. And in some ways, that's kind of nice because that means you get left alone. You don't have somebody looking over your shoulder. I don't think that's quite as true in certain areas of the country. You know, here, when I teach evolution, there are people who don't like it, but they keep their heads down and their mouths shut because they know that they're not going to get the support. So it's almost like they're ashamed of being creationists. In other parts of the country, that's not the case. And so I've often thought it'd be fun to go teach in a deep south school in Mississippi or something and teach evolution the way it's supposed to be taught. And but then I think, yeah, down there you hear about teachers getting physically attacked, vandalism to their homes, to their vehicles, and then I think, okay, would that really be so fun? If you've ever heard of Neil Carter, he had a lot of trouble just because being an atheist and teaching in the South. Trouble with his school. All because of being an atheist. And so, yeah, when I mentioned earlier that it would be kind of fun to live somewhere else for a while, Mississippi isn't on my list. North Dakota is conservative, and sometimes I say it's trying to be the Mississippi of the North. But there is a world of difference there. And honestly, there's a world of difference between North Dakota and where I grew up on the East Coast. Trying to think how to explain that. Basically, where I grew up on the East Coast was, and maybe part of it had to do with the time too. Now that I think about it, when I was growing up, there were no cell phones. Most people did not have the internet. It existed then. Not really like it does now, but you know, it was. I'm Generation X. I'm part of that last generation that grew up without the technology and so on. When I was in third grade, my school bought its first computer. It was an Apple IIe, and they wheeled it from classroom to classroom. We had like Oregon Trail and a couple things like that on it, and basically it was a reward for doing well. I didn't get to use it very often. By the time I was like in junior high, there was a computer lab in the junior high. It was shared with the high school. It was a TRS-80 computer lab, if you remember those. They had they had 2 floppy disk drives, 5 1/4 inch discs, and a monitor. It was all one unit. The monitor was green text on black background, and that was it. No color. They could make little beeping sounds, but basically no sound in them either. It was when I look back on it, I just think, wow, that was my world. At home we had a TI-99 4A. I learned how to program on those 2 machines. Well, I also programmed the Apple IIe a little bit at school. But I learned basically to program on the TRS-80 and the TI-99. Your if you've ever used MS-DOS or the terminal in Linux or Apple OS X, this is not even really that. It's actually you are in a program editor, and that's your interface. Very different. Looking back now, it's just hard to believe. You know, I still have my very first laptop when I went to college. Everybody got a laptop at my college. It is a Compaq Contura, I want to say 4C. I pulled it out for my freshman one day this year. And it just looks so primitive, but I remember how excited I was to get it and how amazed at how futuristic it was. Well, it sure doesn't look that way now. And the freshmen are just like, seriously, dude? You know, 256 colors. There was three and a half inch disk drive. It came with 4 megabytes of memory. I got the expansion up to 8 megabytes of memory. There was, I want to say 130 megabytes, and yes, I am saying megabytes, on the hard drive. And there's a program called Disk Expansion, so I was able to get it up to 160 megabytes on the hard drive. And that was a big improvement. I mean, like that TI-99 came with 16 kilobytes of memory, so put that in perspective. And used a tape cassette to load the programs. So yeah, I really felt like I was moving into the future with this thing. I was amazed at how good photographs looked on it. Trust me, they don't. But at the time, it was just like, wow, man! I'm in the future! I had a mouse, it was running Windows 3.1. It was the future. And it also cost quite a lot more than this MacBook Pro that I'm recording this video on. Sorry about the gross noise. I couldn't have even conceived of doing this on that MacBook, on that Compaq. And it served me well. I mean, yeah, now it's not so much, but it was then. I will also say, when I got my first teaching job, my first real one, moved to West Hope, North Dakota. Good thing I had that laptop, because there was no computer in my classroom. There was no internet in my classroom. The computer lab had just upgraded. They had, I don't remember what it was before I came there. They had just updated, these were 10-year-old Apple computers. They were whatever Apple had 10 years ago, 10 years before 1999, so whatever came out in 1989, I guess. But anyway, they had updated to new iMacs. The iMacs at that time were the ones in the candy shell cases with the CRT monitor. They were still, this was before OS X happened. And our kids were just like, whoa, it's the future, man. And before I left that school, I did finally get a computer in my room, an iMac. For a brief time, they tried giving us those old computers, but they were useless for much of anything. So we did eventually get iMacs. They ran internet into each of the rooms, and yeah, since then I've had internet in every classroom, which is nice. You know, I can't conceive of teaching anymore without the internet. It is such a wonderful resource for looking up facts, for looking for labs, even writing tests. You know, you get an idea of other test questions people have put out there, projects. You know, how are they teaching this lesson in other places? It's just an amazing resource. I keep trying to get away from being so much of a lecturer. Some teachers really like the computer and projector because then they can put all their lectures on PowerPoint. I don't do much of that. If I lecture, I'm writing with a fountain pen underneath a document camera. But I really need to do less of that also, which is something that will be coming up in my note-taking videos. So, we'll get into that more there. But yeah, when I think about it, grew up without a cell phone. Cell phones weren't even a thing when I started teaching, and now they're a problem. I think they're a new form of the same kind of thing. Kids always want to be distracted. They will find things to distract them, whether it's a cell phone or something else. New problems, of course, arise with your cell phones. You've got sexting and all that. But, without going into details, because it would be a student, that is something that came up before cell phones. So, I'll leave it there because, like I said, it's a student who's definitely an adult by now. But anyway, on the whole, I see the technology as a good thing. It's just learning how to use it, learning how to change, maybe do things in a different way because now there's technology to do it. More and more, I think we need to look at tests and how are we actually testing what students know. Do we need to do tests all the time? Are there other ways to evaluate their knowledge? Are there better ways? I had to take a bunch of tests to get my teaching license, but honestly, I don't take tests every day. So are there other ways you can find out what students actually know and can do? And I think that's something we need to look at in education. We're very resistant to change, and honestly, our culture does not like change. I taught in one school where they didn't like the fact that I didn't follow a textbook. I mean, there were letters to the board about me. Yeah, so when I said earlier about they don't usually worry about academics, for the most part, people even there didn't, but there was basically one really vocal family that did. So it does come up, but that stuff is also, I no longer teach at that school. I just said, you know what? You don't want me? There are lots of schools that do, so bye. And I could start in on a rant about how awful a lot of textbooks are, but we're running out of time, and I think that's a topic that probably deserves a whole driving video all by itself, maybe even a pull them out. I'll actually change the topic here. I actually was thinking, I have a number of old textbooks. It might be kind of fun to take a look at a few of them. Like, I have a girls' physics book. Yes, a separate physics course for the girls. Why? Well, because girls aren't going to be doing any of that stuff boys are doing. Girls are going to be at home taking care of the house and the children. So it's all house and children related physics. So it's quite something. Like I said, one of these days I'm going to have to do a video on it and show you. It's interesting. Look, old math books, old biology books. That's changed a lot. For some reason, I don't like old chemistry books. I've got a few, but that's not something I seem to buy very often. But yeah, now that I say that, I definitely am going to have to do a video on old textbooks. But as far as education is concerned, I think one of the things we've been missing is what do we want our kids to take away? And we delude ourselves into thinking all those little facts we're teaching them are going to be taken away, and they're not. If I walk up to one of my students, one of my freshman students right now, school ended just 2 weeks ago, and I say, hey, what's Newton's first law of motion? How many of them are going to be able to tell me? And does that matter? Or would it be more important that they understand that objects resist changes in their state of motion? If they're moving, they want, and I'm using air quotes here, to stay moving. If they're stopped, they want to stay stopped. And if you want to turn them, they resist that. Isn't it really that what I want them to take away? Especially as freshmen. If they can spout off the definition for Newton's first law, but have no understanding of it, well, what was the point, really? And I think we miss that, with our... I always pick on history because it's such an easy target. History teachers get into these dates and specific names and so on, and yeah, some of that's important. But they're going at it bass-ackwards. Start with the big concept. And then the names naturally follow from that. Rather than make the names and the dates the whole point of the subject. Science is so easy to get swamped by that large technical vocabulary. I was reading somewhere that a typical biology book has more new vocabulary in it than a typical Spanish textbook. And when I say Spanish, I mean for students learning Spanish. That's crazy. And it's no wonder they get so lost in science, because they're learning a foreign language, foreign concepts, and, oh yeah, let's look at the big picture too. Well, it's easier for the teacher to test the words and so on, and that's what ends up happening. And that's something I had to fight a lot in myself. I still find myself falling into that trap sometimes. I'm not like I was. I'm a lot better about sticking to concepts. What I sometimes forget is what's the big concept. Now remember, I pulled out of this gas station at the beginning of the video. I said that I had gotten gas, but I lied. I pulled in there to use their squeegee and scrub bird crap off of my windshield. So I'm back now to actually fill up with gas and take the car through the car wash and get the rest of the bird garbage off the car. But it turned out that I needed to scrub with a brush. So I've been scrubbing with a brush a lot since this. But I'll tell you what, since the last time I scrubbed with the brush, I haven't seen any more. So I don't know if it's because I parked in a slightly different place or what it was. But, problem solved. Anyway, I guess if I was where I need to be with my teaching, maybe I should be teaching other teachers at that point. So it's probably just as well that I'm not there yet. I feel like this section of video is speeded up. I know the next part is, because yeah, it does not go this fast. Yeah, I suppose by the time I retire, I'll still be trying to figure it all out. And, it is what it is. I don't believe it when teachers or any professional says they've got it totally mastered, because who does? Now, the reason I kept this going, I've alluded a few times to the fact a lot of businesses moved out of town, to the outskirts of town. This is all symptomatic of that. That restaurant up there on the hill the owners actually used to have a restaurant on Main Street. Now, happily, there is still a restaurant in that building, just a different type of restaurant. But, yeah. One of the grocery stores moved out of town. The hardware store moved out of town. We even had a department store on Main Street that moved out of town. And then some businesses have just closed. The Main Street in town is looking a lot more sparse than it did, and it's a shame. But I think a lot of these businesses want to be out on the highway where people going by can see them. I don't know. But getting back to the education thing, I guess I always think, what do I want the adult student to know? What do I want them to take away from my class after my class is over? And that's really what we should be focusing it around. Sometimes I think we're teaching things we don't need to teach. Sometimes we forget what the goal of what we're teaching actually is. And yeah, you will probably hear me musing on that from time to time in videos to come. You'll see me here to your right this summer. This is our fairgrounds, and we also do a state high school rodeo there. I'm headed east on Highway 12 here. We're looking, pretty close here. You can see them actually on the left, the businesses that moved off Main Street. And in fairness, out here, the delivery is easier. They're in newer, more modern buildings. At least they're clustered together so I can park at one and walk to all three. But still, the sign there that you can see is the hardware store. Just beyond it is the department store. It's a Shopco. And then I'm turning into the grocery store that moved off Main Street this year. So, yeah, when I moved to this town, this was all field, and now it's stores. And what a lot of people do is they park at one, shop there, then they drive to the next one, shop there, drive to the next one. It's not a downtown shopping area anymore. So, on that depressing note, I will leave you. So I thank you for watching. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.